So for today's Blender 3 tutorial series, we're going to be working on an Animal Crossing style figure. I feel like this is a good project once you have your bearings in Blender, so you should watch my introductory videos first if you haven't already. So we're going to jump in on making a character that looks kind of like this, and you'll notice that if it wasn't for the colorization, these forms are actually pretty simple, right? So the geometry just makes the major forms like the head and the ears and so on, and then the minor forms in terms of the mouths, the eyes, the patterns on the clothing and so forth. Those are not 3D modeled, those are actually texture painted, which we're going to cover as well. Okay, and then in terms of Blender setup, there are 3 add-ons that we're going to be using in the course of this video. The first of those is called Add Mesh Extra Objects. The second one is Auto Mirror, and the third one is Loop Tools. So all 3 of those ship with Blender by default, but they aren't activated by default. So you want to go to Preferences Add-ons and make sure that each of those boxes is checked. Okay, and finally, in terms of preparation, I've also created a little image which is known as a turnaround. And I can show this to you real quick. Got this right here. So I have a turnaround of this character that I talk about with my daughter called Howard the Bad Behavior Hippo, and I figured this would be a good opportunity to take some sort of family mythology and then plug it into this this Animal Crossing kind of style. So I just did, a pen and paper drawing. It's not particularly great, but I'm trying to make sure that the proportions are accurate, both in the profile view and in the front-on view, and that my major objects like the top and bottom of the head are matching up more or less straight across. I've also got a color palette in here, which I stole from an actual picture of a hippo. This will just give me a place to start, but I can certainly change these later. Sometimes if you're more confident in Photoshop or something, it's good to have your palette laid out right from the beginning. Okay, so let's head back over to Blender. I have a standard issue file queued up here with my cube, so I'll select that, X to delete, and confirm. And let's go ahead and make a new collection. So I'll right-click over here, and I'll call this collection Ref for reference. Now to bring in a reference image, let me also hide the camera and the light temporarily. In order to bring in a reference image, I'll hit Shift-A for Add, go down to Image, and then pick Reference. And then I just need to navigate to the file. Here's my turnaround right here, but before I click it, I want to take a look up here because Align to View is usually checked by default. So if I keep this checked, it'll make the image show up at a weird angle. So I will uncheck that and load my reference image, and now it just lays down flat there on the surface. If I hit Rotate and along the x-axis and then type in 90, I can get that guy standing up. And then I'll come in here from a side view, zoom in a little bit, and we will pull that over. But before we do that, we will also want to change this thing in terms of opacity. So I look down here at the properties to Object Data. I click on Opacity, and I can drag this down to, say, 25 or something like that. And then finally, grab this guy, move him in X, and I'll get him lined up more or less in the center. And you can see this is not perfect because my drawing is not perfect, but that's completely fine. We'll fix that on the back end. While I'm at it, I might also enable screencast keys here so that you can see some of the stuff that I'm typing. Great. Okay, so we have our first image in. I'll go to Shift-A, add another image, really the same one, also not aligned to the view. But in this case, when I grab this image, pull down its opacity first maybe. I'm also going to rotate this in X by 90 degrees, but then I will rotate it in Z by 90 degrees. And when I come in here to grab this one, I grab it with G, move it along Y, and in this case I'm going to line up more or less the center line of Howard's body. Okay, so when I rotate back out like this, these images should be exactly the same height because I didn't change anything with scale. And now I can see this character from the front and also from the side. Great. And if you want to, you can rename these front and side, but the main thing is being able to select right here so that I can turn the ref images on and off, and I can also click on whether or not they're selectable. So I added this additional filter up here. So this way if I see them, I can't accidentally move those things around. Coffee break. Okay, now that we have all of our preparation done, we're actually ready to start adding in some geometry, and this is where we'll take advantage of those extra objects. So once again, I Shift A, but this time I will go to Mesh and then down to Round Cube. So with a lot of these add-ons, these are things that you could get to if you went through 3 or 4 steps, so add some modifiers to a cube and so forth. This just makes it a little bit more convenient. Before I click away at all here, though, I need to make sure that I pick this little menu that pops up when you add a new piece of geometry, and I change the radius from 0.2 to 1, so effectively 100%. And what that's going to do is make this cube into a circle, or a sphere rather, with these nicely distributed facets. And you can see down here, if you change the arc around, you can make more or less facets. But keep in mind that when you're starting modeling, you always want to go from less, gross details to smaller, finer details. So making this more refined at this point would actually make things harder downstream. So radius 1 and arc 4 if those aren't the defaults that you're already getting. And then we can go ahead and click out somewhere. Okay, a couple more things to set up our cube so it's looking nice. I'm going to head over to Modifiers, and I'm going to click on Subdivision Surface and give it 2 more levels. So that's sort of a live way of doing this, which is different from what I was just saying in terms of the arc fitting when I make the geometry to begin with. So this gives us more refinement, but it's sort of an additional thing, right? So I can toggle it on and off. It's not like an official change to the geometry until I make it permanent. So I'll add that. I want to come in here, right-click, and say Shade Smooth. And now we have what appears to be a really nice, refined sphere, but if I tab over to Edit Mode, there's relatively few points that control its form. So we have our cake and eat it too. We're going to make something that looks really refined, but that doesn't require that you move around a million vertices at the same time. Tab back out of Edit Mode. And finally, let's auto-mirror this thing so we just work on one side. So End to reveal this menu. Oh, it was already up. Edit, Auto Mirror, and then you want to have it set up just like me. So we're mirroring along the x-axis on either side of y. You want to have Cut and Mirror and Use Clip checked. And I'll hit Auto Mirror. It's pretty subtle. You can't always see something happening. But now if I tab over into Edit Mode, you'll see that there's only one set of points for me to deal with. And if I pick one of them and move it with Grab, you should be able to see your actions mirrored on the opposite side. And Escape to quit out of there. And to close that. Awesome. So we have this set up and we're now able to start modeling. One thing I will have you check on as we get going, if I hide these reference images, I just have to pause while my screen blanked out there for a second. So I hide the reference images, get out of editing mode, and you can see that sometimes depending on the order of your modifiers, you'll wind up with a little hump there in the middle. It's kind of hard to make out. But in some views it might be more apparent than others. And we do not want that there. So in this case, it's happily an easy solution. I just take my mirror modifier and then I move it up above my subdivision modifier, and that's going to take care of that. So I would recommend doing that up top so you don't run into that issue downstream. Okay, maybe I'll make a new collection while we're at it. Let's call this Howard or character or whatever it happens to be. And we can start to keep our organization looking tight. I'll bring back up the reference images. I'm going to turn on X-ray. That's a crucial step. And initially this gets hard to see, but then it's easier again to see when I head into edit mode. All right, cool. So why don't I start in object mode just for my initial scaling. S to scale. So I'm going to come in here, grab this to move it around, scale it some more. And then if we look from the front, okay, that's a pretty good place to start. We also want to Control A and apply any transformations that we make while we're still in object mode. And then I'll tab back over now that my initial scaling and placement is done. So we head over to edit mode, and this will allow us to move individual vertices at once. So I can start by, let's see, I like lasso select. I can start by selecting something like this, rotate this guy, and you'll see why I'm doing this in just a second because it has to do with the direction of these vertices. Maybe we'll rotate it a little bit more, and then I'll come in here and I'll grab half of these, G to grab, and then just pull this all the way down. And you can start to see the power of this kind of vertex edit mode approach. Let me rotate the back of the skull, maybe scale it down a little bit, scale these down a little too, or if I wanted, I could rotate it back into its vertical orientation, just scale in Z, right? And so kind of compress that face, grab it to move it back, rotate it back, and so forth. So there's a lot of sort of fiddly messing around here. There's just kind of a general scale. And part of what I want to watch out for here is I don't want to let myself get any of these massive faces that stretch really far, right? So you want your faces to all be roughly rectangular, you know, without like a big old spike sticking out. And you want them also all to be roughly the same size. And this is going to make a much bigger difference later when we get into UVs and texture mapping and texture painting. So let's see, edit mode. I'm going to come over here and start adding some edge loops. So let's hold down the mouse and slide that edge loop till we get it into place. Now I can go back to the select tool and I can scale that edge loop down so I start to get that pinch. I can grab it to move it over and so forth. But I need to be careful because that's a pretty aggressive look there, right? So I come back in with my edge loop adding tool, and then I can add in some more to make sure that they're looking pretty good. And then that's starting to come along. Frequently, you want to be toggling off your reference images, toggling out of edit mode to sort of confirm where the shape is heading and how you like it. If it starts to get pinches that you're not interested in, you want to stay on top of those so you don't have to work, you know, backwards to fix all that stuff. So at this point, I'm just going to continue to make these edits, and I might just go into fast mode a little bit here so I can get the job done. But a couple more tools you should be aware of. So one is if you want to slide one of these individual vertexes around. And right now they're looking pretty even, but if I see one that's sort of getting into a strange spot, I can click on it and then Shift V, and that'll let me slide that vertex along the existing edges to make something, you know, to make my faces more square, more regular. I can also pick an entire edge loop. So for example, I can double click and that will give me everything in the loop. And then if I go to edge, I can come down to edge slide, and that's going to allow me to pull that thing up and down, something like that. Although it was already looking pretty good in the spot it's in. Now, in addition to vertex sliding and edge sliding, there's one more crucial tool you need to be aware of, and that's known as proportional editing. So right now I have my gizmo activated, and let's say that I move a point around. You can see that I'm getting this sort of gray circle, and it's leading other points around this central point to distort. So it's likely that by default you don't have proportional editing activated, and that means that a single point is just going to move around like this. But the downside of that is that's a really sort of muscular move, and so you'll wind up with these weird pinches and valleys and that kind of thing. Whereas proportional edit, as you might guess from the name, allows you to apply 100% of that move to that central point, but then with a sort of fading influence based on the size of your edit scope. There's a couple ways to change how powerful the proportional effect is, and sometimes they almost require 3 hands. So I'm going to hit G for grab, and then with my 3-button mouse, I find this is the easiest way to do it. I just roll here on the wheel, and that'll open that thing up and down. And then if let me come in from a different view, which will make this more apparent if I just hit undo. So let's say I come in from the side, I show my reference image. I just have a single point selected, but I do have proportional edit turned on. So now when I grab and I move, everything kind of moves along with, and so I can capture that forehead in such a way that's not just going to like stick a fin onto the center of this guy like a shark's dorsal fin or something. Great, so vertex sliding, adding edge loops, moving things around with the gizmo, but also proportional editing. These are going to be the tools you'll use. So I'm just going to refine this for a little while until I like it, and then we'll come back and do the ear together. All right, so I spent a little more time with the model. You can see that I haven't done a perfect job in terms of fidelity capturing this form, but as I'm working in the actual 3D, I found that it made more sense to exaggerate the sort of bridge of the nose area. So, of course, go ahead and just use the reference as long as it's useful, and then you can divert from it. But the thing that I keep checking on here, once I tab out and I don't see my reference images anymore, how does this thing look all the way around? Are there any apparent seams or places where I have an angle I'm not super interested in? There's a very light, minor bend right in here, but I think that's going to look okay, kind of like a facet of the head. So I'm going to call this hippo head good. Maybe I'll just save real quick in case the program crashes out. Okay, so the other thing you may have noticed about my reference image is that the secondary geometry that I want to capture here are the ears. I don't think it's really even necessary to look at the image for this part. And this is going to require a new trick, which will be aided by loop tools, one of the add-ons that we talked about at the top. So to figure out where the ear is going to pop out, I'm going to pick one of these faces, and you can do more than one, which we'll do later for legs and thicker items. But I think for my purposes, here I'll switch over to face selection mode. I'll grab this face right here, and then I'll just hit X for delete, and the type of deletion I want is a face delete. So once that gets deleted, if I switch to wireframe, you'll see it adds a little bit more geometry, so it sort of makes an attempt to make a roughly circular area because we are shading smooth. However, it's not a perfect circle, and that's going to lead to some weird distortions in my ear, which I may want, depending on the shape of the ear. But just to assume that we want something that's pretty circular, we'll switch to edge selection mode, double-click to get that whole edge. Maybe I'll turn off the gizmo for now. And then I will right-click at the top if it's installed. I'll see Loop Tools, and then I'll say, let's make that a real circle. And I know it happened under the menu, but now this has been repaired so it's more explicitly circular. That can be kind of useful. Okay. So to create this ear, I'm going to come in from the side, and I'm going to find myself a nice angle where I'm staring right down the edges of the square hole that are traveling away from my eye, and sort of flatten this thing out to the eye, because as I extrude, it'll be closer to 90 degrees. And I'll just hit E for extrude and start to pull that out. And remember, before we were making a form and then adding edge loops in after the fact. Think about each of these extrusions as creating its own edge loop. So I just bring it out a little bit, E, and bring it out a little bit more, although this time I'll scale it at the same time. I always forget I want to scale it without proportional editing, so scale. And then this one will extrude further, trying to keep them relatively perpendicular to one another. Maybe this one will scale even up a little bit more. I can start to rotate my view a little and pan my view. Extrude a little bit more, although this time we're going to start to scale back in. And then just a little teeny tiny extrusion, and that one's going to scale in significantly. And then I'll wind up with this little cap on the end. The edge loop is already selected, so I can just hit F on the keyboard for fill, and then my mirroring takes care of the rest of that. So it's looking pretty good. So, it's sort of swept back a little bit, maybe slightly distorted, so I can move some of these things around if I have a very specific ear shape that I'm going for. But given that this is kind of a cartoony head, and that we're going to take care of the interior of the ear with texture painting, just with different color, I'm not going to bother making this ear, cupped or more sort of structurally accurate. And I can tab out to kind of get a sense of what this is looking like. Pretty good. And I like the way that it's sort of tipping back a little bit, but we could easily fix that by scaling and grabbing and moving those edge loops. Okay, so now that I've got that going, you pretty much have all the tools for making the rest of this body. So we'll bring in another round cube for the torso. That'll have a radius of 1 and an arc fitting of 4. And then I'll make that sort of like, I guess this guy looks like he's supposed to be chubby, right? So I'll make a chubby little body, and then I can shoot an arm out of that. I can shoot a leg out of that, maybe a little tail if we're really feeling it. So again, I'll just put this into fast motion so you can get a sense for how this process works. So I thought I'd just pop out of fast motion here real quick just to mention that, again, we always want to be working in the cycles renderer whenever we're doing previews, because cycles is going to see things a little bit different from Eevee. Cycles is going to be more labor intensive on the computer, but because that's our ultimate goal, we just want to make sure if it renders well in cycles throughout, then we're in good hands. Okay, so I've got my little body going here. You know, there's maybe a couple places I would spend a little bit more time on if I were you. I can see ever so slightly some kind of, banding in here, so I might try to figure out where that's coming from and sort of smooth that out, but this is just a demo after all. So let's keep things moving. But again, we do the, the arms just like we did the other piece. I'll show you that as well, but just think ears when you're doing arms and legs. Right there, I should mention there was another trick. If you're coming out here at an angle and you want to align all these vertices at the same time to one of the axes, you can say scale, mention the axis, and then say 0, and it will understand that it's supposed to drop all of those onto the same axis. So in that case, I selected this this loop, and then I did scale Z0, and that's what flattened it out. Okay, so the last thing we'll talk about when it comes to preparing this kind of geometry is now how to use this base, and I'll probably save it as I go, to do something such as generate some clothing. Okay, so to get my pants going, let's do pants on this guy just for the demo. I'll select the body and hit tab, so I bring up those faces. I have X-ray selected, and I'll come in from the side. And because my model is pretty simple, this shouldn't be too challenging. For this, I will just use, the select lasso. Let's bring the pants up about this high, and as long as I don't include the dots that are at the center of each of these little facets, I should get all those selected at the same time. Now I can come and take a look around and make sure that I got everything that I want. It looks like these pants could probably use one more subdivision down here. So let's add one real quick. And then I'll come back in on the side and do it again. Face select mode, like so. And that way they're more like short pants. Okay, so we've got all those objects. We're going to go to Shift D for duplicate. But before we move our mouse around or anything, I want to hit escape, which is going to mean it's going to duplicate those items and then leave them in place. Now I'll hit P on the keyboard, and that'll take me to the separate menu, and now I can say separate by selection. And now I have an additional set of facets there that are sitting exactly on top of the old facets. You'll see this will get called, it's a copy of what it came from, so I want to rename this as pants. And then I can leave edit mode and come back out here. Now if you're lucky, those pants are going to look exactly right. But in some cases when you duplicate them, things will get a little weirder, so you might have to take this object and scale it ever so slightly and reposition it to get it to show up correctly. But now what I can do, for example, is I can take these pants, go to the materials, and associate them with a new material that's one color, and then associate the body with the material that's a different color. And then if I preview this in this mode, you'll start to get a sense of what we've got. Great, so that's how we get the geometry done for our Animal Crossing figure. Only the basic shapes are necessary at this stage, and then in the next tutorial we'll get into UV mapping and texture painting.